The camera lights blazed across the grand stage as Joel Osteen leaned forward, his polished smile fixed but his eyes sharp. The audience waited for him to introduce the next segment. Instead, his tone suddenly changed. "Senator Kennedy, we don't need divisive words here. Let's keep this short and respectful," Osteen said, raising his hand as if to cut Kennedy off mid-sentence. Gasps echoed across the room. The crowd hadn't expected the pastor to silence a sitting senator. John Kennedy didn't flinch. He adjusted his glasses, glanced at the audience, and leaned into the microphone with a calm, steady voice. "Well, Joel," Kennedy said, his tone slow but commanding, "I was raised to believe that respect doesn't mean silence. Respect means telling the truth, even when it makes people uncomfortable." The audience erupted in applause. Cameras zoomed in on Osteen's face, his smile faltering for the first time. Kennedy pressed on. "You talk about faith, but faith without accountability is empty. If leaders can stand in front of millions and avoid hard questions, then what exactly are we teaching the people who look up to us?" Osteen tried to wave him off again, but the crowd had turned. Murmurs grew into cheers. Phones shot up into the air, live streaming the exchange. Kennedy stood taller, his southern drawl cutting through the noise. "I will not be silenced. Not here, not anywhere. Because if the truth offends someone, then maybe it was meant to." The room exploded with thunderous applause. Viewers online clipped the moment instantly, blasting it across every platform. Within hours, "Kennedy shuts down Osteen" trended at the top of social media feeds. Osteen, visibly shaken, forced a smile and tried to shift the program forward, but the damage was done. Kennedy had flipped the entire room with one unshakable statement. By the end of the night, it wasn't the sermon people remembered. It was the senator who refused to be silenced. Joel Osteen tried to regain control of the stage, his voice soft but firm. "Now, Senator, this isn't the place for politics. People came here for inspiration, not confrontation," he said, flashing his practiced smile toward the audience. But Kennedy didn't back down. He folded his hands on the podium and gave Osteen a steady look. "Joel, inspiration without truth is just performance. And if you wanted a performance, you should have told me before I walked on this stage." The audience gasped again. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd as the tension mounted. Kennedy's voice grew stronger. "You invited me here. Don't act surprised when I speak plainly. The people of this country deserve leaders who will tell it like it is, not sugarcoat it for applause." Phones in the audience buzzed as clips were already being posted online. Kennedy's words hit hard, and the room felt charged, like history was unfolding in real time. Osteen shifted uncomfortably, his usual polished composure cracking. Joel Osteen cleared his throat, trying to laugh off the moment. "Senator, I think we can agree that kindness is more powerful than criticism," he said, attempting to pull the audience back to his side. Kennedy tilted his head, unimpressed. "Kindness doesn't mean silence. Kindness means telling folks the truth, even when it's hard to hear. If a doctor refuses to tell his patient the bad news because he wants to be kind, is that really kindness, or cowardice?" The crowd erupted in cheers. A chant started to bubble in the back rows, faint at first but growing louder, asterisk, "Let him speak. Let him speak. Asterisk." Osteen's smile grew tight. He tried to keep his composure, but the chants overpowered his microphone. Kennedy took a step forward, his voice steady but commanding. "You can't inspire people by muzzling the truth. You can only inspire them by having the courage to face it." At that moment, the cameras swung toward Osteen. For the first time, he looked cornered. The atmosphere shifted. The audience wasn't just watching anymore, they were taking sides. Osteen raised his hand, trying to calm the room. "Friends, let's not turn this into a spectacle," he urged, his voice echoing across the hall. But Kennedy leaned into the microphone, his expression unshaken. "Joel, the spectacle didn't start with me. It started when you tried to silence me for saying what needed to be said. The crowd roared in approval. Some stood up, clapping. Others recorded every word, knowing it would hit the internet within seconds. Kennedy glanced around the room, his tone calm but firm. America doesn't need more polished speeches. It needs honesty. And if honesty makes people uncomfortable, maybe that's the sign we need it most. The applause grew thunderous, drowning out Osteen's attempt to respond. He tried to smile, but his eyes betrayed frustration. For the first time, the balance of power had visibly shifted, and everyone could feel it. The chants of the crowd grew louder, echoing through the hall, truth. 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 Osteen forced a smile, gripping the edges of his podium. Senator, I respect your passion, but this platform is about unity, not division, he said, raising his voice above the crowd. Kennedy shook his head slowly, his southern drawl cutting through the noise. Unity without honesty is just a lie dressed in nice words. You can build a crowd with empty promises, Joel, but you can't build trust. The audience erupted. Some stood on their chairs, clapping and cheering. The moment was slipping further out of Osteen's control. Cameras zoomed in as Kennedy leaned closer to the microphone. You can silence one man, but you can't silence the truth. And if the truth rattles the walls of this room, then maybe these walls needed rattling. The roar of the crowd was deafening. Osteen's carefully polished image had cracked wide open under the spotlight. Joel Osteen's voice faltered as he tried to regain command. Senator, people don't come here to be lectured. They come here to be uplifted, he said, his smile now looking more forced than genuine. Kennedy didn't hesitate. Uplifted by what? Comforting lies? Folks don't need sugarcoating. They need leaders who respect them enough to tell them the truth, plain and simple. The audience clapped wildly, many rising to their feet. The chants grew louder, let him speak. Let him speak. Osteen's composure was breaking. He looked out at the crowd, realizing the energy had shifted against him. Kennedy paused, then delivered his words with piercing clarity. Joel, the truth doesn't divide, it reveals. And once it's revealed, people can finally decide for themselves. That's real unity. Phones flashed, cameras rolled, and within seconds, the clip was already being streamed worldwide. Osteen's attempt to silence Kennedy had backfired spectacularly. By now, the entire room was on its feet. The energy was electric, every word Kennedy spoke landing like a hammer. Osteen tightened his grip on the microphone. Senator, this isn't a courtroom. This is a place of hope, he said, his voice straining as he tried to steer the narrative back in his favor. Kennedy calmly adjusted his glasses, his gaze steady. Hope without truth is just illusion. And illusions don't last. They shatter the moment reality comes knocking. The audience exploded with cheers so loud that Osteen had to pause. His famous stage presence, the smile, the charisma, the practiced calm, was unraveling before everyone's eyes. Kennedy leaned forward, his words sharp and deliberate. You invited me here to speak. I came to honor that invitation. But let me make one thing clear, I will not trade truth for applause. Not today, not ever. The crowd roared so fiercely that the floor seemed to shake. It was no longer Osteen's stage, it belonged to Kennedy. The chants of the crowd grew deafening, echoing off the walls, Kennedy. 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 Joel Osteen tried to raise his voice above the noise, but every word was drowned out. His attempt to silence Kennedy had ignited something he could no longer control. Kennedy lifted his hand slightly, and the crowd began to quiet, waiting for him to speak again. His presence commanded the room. Joel, Kennedy said firmly, if telling the truth shakes this house, then maybe it wasn't built on a solid foundation in the first place. The words hit like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled across the hall before turning into thunderous applause. Osteen forced a laugh, but his polished image had slipped too far. Cameras zoomed in, catching the unease in his eyes. Meanwhile, Kennedy stood tall, unwavering. The truth doesn't need permission. It doesn't wait for approval. It stands on its own, and tonight, it's standing right here. The crowd erupted again, and the moment was sealed. Kennedy had transformed what was meant to be Osteen's stage into his own battlefield of truth. The roar of the audience refused to die down. Every camera angle, every live stream was locked onto Kennedy. Osteen adjusted his suit jacket, trying to regain control. "Friends, let's remember this is a place of peace," he said, forcing his smile once again. Kennedy didn't hesitate. He turned directly toward him, his tone sharp but calm. "Peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of justice. And justice starts with truth. You can decorate a stage with lights and music, Joel, but if the truth is missing, all you've got is a show." The audience exploded in applause, some chanting *truth. Truth. Truth. Asterisk as the sound echoed like thunder. Osteen shifted uneasily, his attempt at charm failing him. The spotlight had swung entirely to Kennedy, and the people were eating up every word. Kennedy let the silence linger just long enough before adding, "America doesn't need more performers. It needs leaders who can look people in the eye and say what needs to be said, even if it costs them popularity." The cheers grew so loud that the walls themselves seemed to tremble. The cameras caught every flicker of Osteen's expression, his smile slipping, his eyes darting nervously toward the crowd. The man who usually controlled every stage he walked onto suddenly looked cornered. He tried one last time to steer the narrative. "Senator, people came here tonight for encouragement, not confrontation," Osteen said, his voice carrying a hint of desperation. Kennedy didn't blink. He leaned slightly toward the microphone, his tone crisp. "Encouragement without honesty is manipulation. If we tell people only what they want to hear, we're not lifting them up, we're leading them blind." The crowd erupted again, louder than before. Many were on their feet, cheering, clapping, shouting Kennedy's name. Kennedy paused, letting the applause thunder through the hall before continuing. "Joel, you can decorate your words in velvet, but the truth doesn't wear disguises. It shows up plain, simple, and unshakable. And people are starving for it." The audience roared so fiercely that even the stage lights seemed to vibrate. Osteen stood silent, outshined in the very house he had built. The crowd was now firmly in Kennedy's corner. Every word he spoke felt like it had been waiting to be said for years, and the people responded with raw energy. Joel Osteen shifted uncomfortably, his polished image cracking under the pressure. "Senator," he said, voice tight, "we don't need anger dividing us. We need love to unite us." Kennedy gave a small, knowing smile. "Love without truth isn't love, it's a performance. Real love tells the hard truth because it cares enough not to lie." The audience erupted, many clapping so hard their hands stung. Some even began chanting, "Truth is love. Truth is love. Asterisk." Kennedy pointed gently toward the crowd. "Look at them, Joel. They don't want theater. They don't want staged smiles. They want leaders who'll risk their comfort to tell them what's real. That's not anger. That's respect." The cheers thundered so loudly that Osteen's microphone seemed useless. His attempts to control the room had completely collapsed. For the first time, Kennedy's calm voice was the only one the audience trusted. By now, the hall felt less like a church service and more like a turning point in history. Every phone in the room was up, every live stream buzzing with comments and reactions. Osteen tried to maintain composure, but the unease in his voice betrayed him. "Senator, with all due respect, this is supposed to be a moment of faith, not a debate." Kennedy straightened his posture, his voice calm yet powerful. "Faith without truth is nothing but theater. If we can't speak truth in a place of faith, then where can we?" The audience erupted again, the roar nearly shaking the rafters. Some people were in tears, shouting Kennedy's name, as if they knew they were witnessing a moment that would be replayed for years. Kennedy continued, his words measured but cutting deep. You can silence microphones, you can wave off speakers, but you cannot bury the truth. It has a way of rising every time someone tries to hold it down. The cheers were deafening. Osteen's shoulders slumped as the reality set in, he had lost the crowd completely. The chants of Kennedy. 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 Rolled like thunder, drowning out every attempt Osteen made to regain the stage. He raised his hands, pleading with the crowd. Friends, please, this isn't about sides. But Kennedy's voice sliced through the noise, calm yet commanding. No, Joel. This is about sides. You either stand with the truth, or you stand in its way. And tonight, the people have already chosen. The audience erupted in a standing ovation, stomping their feet against the floor so hard the sound shook the stage. Kennedy turned, addressing the cameras directly now. The truth doesn't belong to me, it doesn't belong to Joel, it belongs to the people watching right now. And the people are tired of being silenced. Social media was already ablaze. Clips spread across platforms, trending in minutes. Hashtags calling out Osteen's attempt to silence Kennedy climbed to the top of feeds worldwide. Osteen's smile had vanished entirely. He looked small against the tidal wave of energy that Kennedy had unleashed. The energy in the hall was overwhelming, every cheer, every chant crashing like waves against the stage. Kennedy stood at the center of it all, steady and unshaken, while Osteen looked like a man watching his own stage slip away. Kennedy lifted his hand, and the room quieted almost instantly. The respect was undeniable. Joel wanted to silence me tonight, Kennedy said, his voice carrying across the hushed hall. But what he forgot is that truth doesn't need a microphone. Truth doesn't need permission. Truth speaks through the people, and the people are louder than any pastor or politician. The crowd exploded again, some raising their phones high, others pumping their fists in the air. Osteen's face tightened, his usual charm gone. He muttered something into his mic, but the cheers swallowed his words whole. Kennedy turned to face him directly. You can run a stage, Joel. You can fill a room with lights and music. But you can't cage the truth. Tonight proved that once and for all. The hall shook with the roar of approval. Kennedy had not only won the moment, he had redefined it. The hall felt electric, as if history itself had chosen to sit in the front row. Kennedy stood tall, his words echoing long after he spoke them, while Osteen remained frozen in silence. The crowd's chants rolled like thunder, truth. 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 Kennedy gave one last look across the sea of faces, his voice calm but resolute. Remember this night. Not because a senator spoke, not because a pastor tried to silence him, but because the people reminded us all that truth cannot be chained. Not here, not anywhere. The audience erupted into its loudest roar yet, the sound shaking the very walls. Clips of the moment were already flooding every platform online, exploding into headlines by the minute. Osteen forced a weary smile, but it was too late. His attempt to silence Kennedy had become the very reason Kennedy's words would live on. As